Humanity Matters.
I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan, of Raised by Survivors here on HMTV at the Holocaust Memorial Intolerance Center. I have a very special guest who's become a very dear friend very quickly. He's got an incredible past. He still has a lot more to do because he is what they call a whirlwind. He is kind of like the Energizer Bunny, and he's got a lot more to do. And you'll see that today by the things that he talks about that he's done in the past, which were quite incredible. Steve Ludsin, thank you so much for joining me today. Your story begins with a very deep family root in Latvia. Your grandfather owned a music store, from what I understand. Right. A cultural anchor in a world that would soon be torn apart. This is just before World War II and the Holocaust. His father left Latvia before the Holocaust, came to the United States, attended law school, and served in the United States Army. By a twist of fate, he was at the World's Fair in Flushing when the Nazis invaded Latvia. And because he couldn't return, his life was saved. Steve's mother, on the other hand, Sonia, survived the Holocaust itself, but carried with her the unimaginable weight of that experience. Unlike Steve and his father, who traveled back to Latvia twice, she chose never to return, a decision that speaks volume about the different ways survivors carried their memories. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter appointed Steve to the President's Commission on the Holocaust, making him the only second-generation survivor, a 2G, to serve on that historic body. He went on to play a pivotal role in shaping the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and has been a driving force in Holocaust education and advocacy ever since. Steve has also written widely, from Holocaust memory to the mortgage crisis, and through it all, he's been described as a whirlwind, the Energizer Bunny who never slows down. From boyhood to today, that boundless energy has fueled a lifetime of service, leadership, and remembrance. It's my honor to welcome to HMTV Steve Ludsin. Welcome.
Thank you, Bernie.
Steve Ludsin may not be widely known, but his influence in Holocaust remembrance and education is extraordinary. Could you tell us a little bit about when that started happening?
It's a great question because arguably it started at birth because we were a very small unit, so to speak. There were no grandparents. 3 of them were killed. The grandfather who had the music store, he died before the Holocaust. So here I am with my mother, who's a survivor, her 2 brothers who were survivors, and my father, who got out, but he had survivor guilt. So that was that package. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm sure you had the same feeling, Bernie, and I'm so happy to be your new best friend that I wasn't kidding. But when I watched your movie, and I said, my God, it was a mirror. But the way it happened for me was that starting at a young age, I think by osmosis, mm-hmm. I absorbed something, mm-hmm. and I think, for lack of a better word, grief. And my mother and her brothers were grieving, mm-hmm. and my father was grieving, and I had that outgoing personality, and I was a source of happiness, of love, of hope, all of which sounds sort of schmaltzy, but I'm known for that. But I have this picture of myself with one of those uncles, and he's holding me up. It was as if I was a deity, He's just looking at me, and he's quelling, and you could see it on the photograph. And my uncles were really dynamic men, and I'm built like those guys. We were kidding about it. But anyhow, so I carried that with me, grew up in Clifton, New Jersey, which in some ways was like being in Kansas in the 50s, Mm-hmm. And fortunately for me, it wasn't a very large Jewish community, so I was really near the top of the class. And I always joke about, I said, I always thought I did it on good looks and personality, but it turns out I was smart. And so all that time, I think the awakening, for lack of a better word, was somewhere at Cornell, undergraduate. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of turmoil in those years. And I remember this feeling, I can almost remember the moment. And I'm walking around and I said, you're different. You have a different attitude. And the idea of, quote, a revolution, I thought was just foolish, mm-hmm. because I know what upheaval was, mm-hmm. just from what my family went through. And then through law school, being in New York, there was more of that feeling of I'm in New York. And I like to tell this story because what disturbed me about being in Manhattan, I ended up at Fordham Law School, which was, really more of a Gentile environment. No offense, so to speak. So I managed to navigate and get a lot of law jobs. And the great thing that happened to me is I traveled with the Attorney General of New York State. And I mentioned in the context of the Holocaust, I had clerked in the Charitable Foundations Bureau. And one of my friends was a prominent family. He brought me into the UJ Federation world, and I'm going to these lovely salons and meeting nice women. It was all very, very nice. And in 1975, they said, Steve, what are you interested in? And I said, the Holocaust. And I guess it's arguable that I was kind of an outlier, as they say, at that time. There wasn't that much orientation. And what disturbed me is I'm in Manhattan, the second largest Jewish Holocaust survivor population in the world, and there was nothing acknowledging the Holocaust. And it was just something that happened. It wasn't like I set upon it. It just came. It was like one of these things that the moment met me.
Right time, right place.
Exactly. And if I tell you, and you know me long enough to know, Bernie, I'm not known for my humility, but I joke about it. I like Gold in my ears saying, she said, don't be so humble, you're not that terrific. So
she said that?
Yeah, that's one of her lines. Better in the original Hebrew. But in any event, so I think to myself, at that time, I said, well, why don't I incorporate a foundation? Remembrance, the Holocaust Foundation. And I put some money in the bank. This wasn't, this wasn't the Ford Foundation, but I did it. And fortunately, that, in effect, identified me with that cause. And more importantly, it was somewhat of a credibility thing. And then I never imagined, and as a shout out to my alma mater, one of my fraternity's brothers was from the Tisch family, and so he's kind of took an interest and included me to things. And as I told you in college, my nickname was Tato, a very waspy name. And then one of my classmates was Tom Downey, who was here from Suffolk County, and he was Italian-Irish, but he was within the same school at Cornell, which was the Industrial Labor Relations School. And there were only 100 students in the class. So it was as if we had our own college within this massive university. So we got to be friends. And my good fortune, because it's all about luck. And when you think about it, that's been in my veins. My father was lucky.
There's luck and some hard work. I mean, you can have luck in front of you, but you can look the other way.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
And one of the lines I like is that luck is when ability meets opportunity.
Very good.
And that happened to me. And then that led to it, and then I applied to get on the President's Holocaust Commission. And I joke about it. I'm not really dyslexic, and I'm not slighting people for that, but I said, I think no is on. So they said no. I said, oh, we're on.
Okay.
But I was relentless.
Yeah.
And that's part of my character, as you can tell, not too far from you.
I want to unpack a little bit about your relationship with your mom. Now, your mom, she refused to return back to Europe when you went back twice with your dad. What does that say about the different ways survivors and their families process memory? Well,
I think certainly the obvious part is the trauma.
Right.
And there isn't anybody who wants to revisit a trauma, really.
Right. It's so true.
And also, if you do it, then for some people, I guess it's a form of catharsis. For some people, it's not possible. Because, look, she was, I don't like to say mentally ill in a condemning way, but my view is that anybody who survived that, you don't come out the same.
She was, I say that all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And these were depressed people.
Yeah.
And
even though sometimes on the outside they didn't come across depressed, but inside they were hurting.
Well, that was a good insight because my mother was a performer. The way she survived with my mother, my mother and her two brothers, my uncles, is they performed. Because in Latvia, German was a second language. And they were singers. So they used to entertain the Nazis. But in terms of her inability to go back, it's the idea of, there was no incentive. She doesn't need to see where she was imprisoned. She doesn't need to see where arguably her family was killed. But she couldn't cope with it emotionally. Because candidly, look, as a young boy, what did I know? We would watch the 50s. We would watch, Ozzie and Harriet and Life with Father, whatever, Beaver. But that wasn't my home. And I really think, Bernie, and I think you could agree with me, we lived in two societies at the same time. And at home, it was Latvia. We could have been anywhere. And I jokingly say, but seriously, I say I'm the Latvian unicorn from diaspora in New Jersey. There's no such place. But I could have been anywhere. My father ended up in Passaic because he had family in Passaic. And more importantly, it was the idea of being able to function in both those sides. But going back to the question, is that my father did it because I think he needed to feel a sense of, fulfilling his own sense of what was. And we saw my grandfather's music store in Riga, Latvia. In 1984, it was still
there.
Open.
Is it still there
Yes.
today?
Today, I don't know.
Right, because what do they sell there?
Records, musical instruments, and it was a thriving business. And it's funny because everybody you meet whose family were survivors, there wasn't a poor person.
Who owned it when you
My
went
father.
back?
Oh, when we went back, it was that's a good question.
Oh, the Nazis took it over,
Nazis
and they
took
gave
it
it
over,
to,
and they gave it to either a local Latvian collaborator, and I assume they held on to it until the communists decided that they're in charge.
I see.
And I don't even know if there was private ownership, at least not in 1984.
Right.
In 1991, Latvia became independent. And my father managed to figure out how to get back 3 apartment buildings that my grandfather owned in Liepāja, Latvia, which is the sister city, and arguably the only 2 cities. It's sort of like going between here and East Hampton. I mean, it's not a very large country.
Right.
And that was incredible because, and I have that filmed. We went to a hearing at the town council, and my father could show that he was a direct descendant of the owner, Abraham Ludsin.
Yeah.
But here's this really scary part. And, I have this feeling, Bernie, like we all talk about Bashir, and things that happen are, quote, I call it supernaturally improbable. And in my case, look, they killed almost 90% of the Latvian Jews. So the fact that I even exist is a total improbability. And I think on some level that gave me the chutzpah because I said, what do I got? What do I have to lose? I'm here because it's kind of a miracle. So go for it. And that's what my father did for me. But in terms of my mother's trauma, they couldn't go back. She couldn't go back, and nor did my 2 uncles.
Do you remember when you first learned about the Holocaust? Did you learn it from your mom or your dad, or was it school?
None of the above, interestingly. My father fed it to me very slowly and say, read this, read that, but he didn't force feed me.
Right. How old were you about?
When that happened?
Yeah.
I want to say probably when I was in grade school. Because my father was good at having books and, a lot of, remember the Life, and they always had those photographic albums. Sure. And there was one album that just always used to it was like a moth to a flame.
Right.
It was literally a dead body with a wall of the liberation of the concentration camp, and the walls kind of sitting on this man, crushing him. Yeah. And I just would look at that, and it just, I didn't say fascinated me, but just I couldn't look away. And that began to make me understand this happened. And then there were the shows that very slightly, there were maybe some kind of documentaries, that happened. Also, interestingly, my father's side, my one only brother that survived, went to Palestine in the late 30s. So they were Israeli. His wife got out before the Holocaust. And so there was a little bit of that sense of, okay, these people were displaced. My father was the benefactor for the whole family. He had the enterprise to create another business, and it was successful, not funny money, but enough money to give me what I call freedom. And so, but in answer to your question, I think it was in grade school. And then it didn't hit that many times, except what I picked up at home.
Right.
My mother deteriorated over that time.
Did she ever watch films? Like I used to watch my parents react to those films back in the day when they showed everything. You know what I'm saying? Today, they don't show all of the gory stuff. But back then they did. My mother would just sit there and sob, and I knew that she had some kind of a connection to it. And I was very young.
Yeah. Well, I think I knew there was a connection in part because they spoke many languages at home, even though there was a fear of communism. And if you had a foreign language, they could be communist, but that didn't matter. They still did it. So there was Yiddish, a little bit of Russian, a little bit of Latvian,
right,
and obviously English, some German. And but I mentioned that because that also alerted me. I'm in a different environment. Because if I'd go to another friend's home, even a Jewish friend, that wasn't in the air. This was in the air.
Right.
But I also believe what was in the air was...
Did you realize that your parents were different, or at least your mother was different?
Well, they also had accents, Bert. Think about it, right?
Right, that's
the
true.
V's were W's.
That's true.
That's
right.
And I'm not saying in a mean way.
Right, and the W's were V's.
Exactly, right. And then the observation was my sister said she didn't know my mother had an accent because that's what she was used to. Right. And, but...
I didn't either, quite honestly, because their friends were also survivors.
Right.
So they all spoke like that.
So that was sort of normal. It was the other people.
It was the other people
right.
that what got weird accents.
Where'd you get those
people?
accents?
Yeah.
Right. But my father was self-conscious about it because he was really good at assimilating much more. He had the body language. He knew how to dress. He was kind of like the Dale Carnegie. And I look at him and, and of course I There's nothing that was, my father was from heaven, and I hate to say it, but my mother was from hell in the sense that that was the dichotomy.
Yeah.
And so I was constantly trying to do that balance. And it's a hard thing to do.
Did they have a good relationship, your parents?
Did they have a good relationship? I think it's fair to say that they had a good relationship, but unfortunately over time, my mother continued to deteriorate.
Did your father understood her situation?
Oh,
Was he empathetic to
totally.
the things she went through?
Totally. I think in large part, first of all, she was a beautiful woman. And it was a natural thing because he is here in America and there was no touch with the old country.
Right.
And so, and that happened with a lot of survivors.
Right.
And it wasn't terribly romantic necessarily. They say, you survived, I survived, you lost your family, you lost everybody. Fine, let's get married. It's kind of like a Mel Brooks routine. He said, look, you marry me, watch my back. But seriously, so the relationship was such that my father, fortunately, was successful and had the outside world, and he could watch his own achievements. And my mother, unfortunately, was confined to at home. She had friends. She was very social. But as you pointed out, if she was in public, she would light up. Yeah. And that was a relief, even for me.
Right.
Because otherwise, you know, you always, I was sort of the, what's the right word? Like you said, the Energizer bunny, but I had to be a parent to my parents. And that happened specifically, I saw it when I went away to college and my sister went away to college. And once my sister went away to college, she's younger than me, my mother fell apart. And that was hard because we had to take some serious medical steps. And my father and I would speak about it. And, you know, I was kind of his support. And again, you have to look back and say, not a lighter moment, but like, you don't remember everything. So senior year, we had a tradition of speaking on the phone every Sunday. And in the old days, it was long distance, but my father was, you know, we had to worry about the money, and I spoke to him every Sunday. Turns out I told that to my friend. He said, you spoke to him every Sunday your junior year. And I used to have to arbitrate their differences. And so I became a good negotiator because I was dealing with two very emotionally charged people who I love. And I'm supposed to try to find some sort of common ground, if you will. And I think that really prepared me. And all of those things prepared both of us. I mean, you have a great presence, and I loved your movie. And I know you didn't interview me to get the feedback, but I can't help myself because it was just so powerful. And I was jumping out of my seat because, my God, Bernie, and you read it when we met.
Absolutely.
And these are things that you can't explain to other people unless you have this background.
Correct.
And in my case, I still pinch myself that I got on the president's panel.
Let's talk about that. 1979.
Yeah.
President Carter
Yeah.
appointed you on this commission of the Holocaust. What did it mean to you?
The Yiddish phrase Lebensgefahr, you know, it was just beyond any reckoning. And at the time, I was smart enough, I guess you could say, instead of practicing law, because there were thousands of smart Jewish guys like me that were willing to work midnight and weekends. I didn't want to work midnight and weekends. I didn't have to, but it wasn't because I lacked ambition. It's just that I wasn't well suited for that. I'm not somebody you put in a room and read. It's almost like you're a Talmudic scholar.
Right.
So anyhow, the reason I tell you that is I managed to get myself into Salomon Brothers, which was like Goldman Sachs in its day. And that opened up doors, but it gave me leverage. And I knew just by saying that I'm from Salomon Brothers that I would get some attention. And I used the station, not the station, but I'd have everything addressed to me at Salomon Brothers because I wanted to see, look, I'm not just, excuse the phrase, I'm not just a pisher.
Right.
But I'm also...
You're not a regular schmagega.
No, but even more, it was the idea of, what is it, going beyond your reach.
Right.
And they say you had to go out of your comfort zone. But ironically, I didn't feel as if I was out of my comfort zone.
Yep.
Not in small part because I learned politics traveling with Louis Lefkowitz for 2 months. And I saw the process. It's a people business. And I'm a people person. And the way I got hired at Salomon, three aspects that are interesting. And they relate to the Holocaust. I remember coming into the interview, and the interviewer was a solid, strong guy. I described him as a Jewish Marine. You know, how do you do? Very formal. And he looks at my resume. He says it's kind of cluttered. I said, oh, great, I'm getting free resume advice, right? And it was a December day. It was kind of depressing. And then he looked, and we're going back and forth, kind of like you and I, but it was more of a sparring situation because it's an interview. And he's trying to sort of feel like, where's this guy's weak spots, et cetera. And he finally looks at me and he said, you look like an overachiever. How come? So I said to myself, you know, there must be a Harvard MBA answer for this, but I didn't go to Harvard and I didn't have an MBA. So I said, I think I'll tell him the truth. And it was a nanosecond decision, right? I said, the reason I'm an overachiever is my parents are both from Europe. My father's a self-made man, and my mother's a survivor of a concentration camp. And Bernie, you could literally see him go, whoa. He didn't see it coming. He said to me, you're hired.
You were a driving force in creating the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. What role did you play, and what makes you proudest of that institution today?
The role I played is that in some ways I was kind of like a mascot. And I mean that in a sense, I was the youngest member of the group.
Right.
I was the only child of a survivor. And I reminded people of that.
Yeah.
Because I took it upon myself, although I wasn't clearly elected to that.
Right.
In fact, I was kind of a spokesperson for my generation because I was there, sort of self-fulfilling. So when we were at a meeting, I would try to have a sense of proportion, if you will, and contribute. I obviously was aligned with the survivors in terms of the emotions and the depression and the trauma. And then I also was aligned with some of the people who were, you know, American-born Jewish people who were there because of their commitment, but they weren't survivors. And as an illustration, Bernie, of the moment where that became very relevant was that there was a debate as to which way the museum would be laid out. Should it be laid out chronologically or reverse chronologically, right? And when you go into the museum, you go into that elevator, and the first thing you hear is a short film where they show the liberation, and an American serviceman with a voiceover says, these things just don't happen. And they do. So that's, in effect, the end of the Holocaust. But the moment you step out of the elevator, you are going to pre-Holocaust, the deterioration of society, from, I call it the humiliation to the isolation to the annihilation. And it's all done very methodically. But what's the point? We're at a meeting. The survivors said, no, it has to be chronological. And they were right, right? And many times they would disagree to disagree. And sometimes these meetings were like a Talmudic thing. You would say one thing, they would say the other. And to Elie Wiesel's credit, he was brilliant at saying yes to both sides. And somehow he managed to ride the tigers, if you will. Where's my point? Is that I'm listening to their side, so to speak, and then I listened to they had hired professional consultants to lay out the museum. And they say it should be reverse chronological. So in a moment of clarity, I said, you know, I understand where the professionals are coming from, because they feel this is what they would do, what it should be look like, and theirs is based on their professional judgment and their experience. I said, however, the survivors, these are the last people who are a direct link to the horror. So if they say it should be chronological, I said, then I think it should be chronological.
It's their story.
Right. And I said, I'm not a survivor, but I'm the only child of a survivor. So I think I understand their emotions. On the other hand, I'm assimilated. I'm a lawyer. I'm working in an investment bank. You know, I'm a macher, as we say at our new club.
Not only are they survivors, but they're storytellers.
Exactly.
And when you tell a story, you tell from the beginning to the end.
Exactly.
So you see the whole thing in proper context.
And not only that, but they lived it.
They lived it.
So they remember what it was like to first feel isolated, and they couldn't go to school, and they couldn't sit here. And they, well, okay, we'll try to cope. And then all of a sudden they said, well, actually, we're going to move you.
Right.
And then on, and then we're going to starve you. And then we're going to kill you. And I don't mean to be so blatant about it, but
that's exactly how it happened.
And here's the moment. So Elie Wiesel, who was not the kind of guy like you and me, we give each other bear hugs, right? That wasn't Elie. But he wasn't a cold man.
He was part of this committee.
He was the head of it.
He was the head of the committee.
He was the chairman. And he, in a real effect, he was the light. Okay, he was the light in the darkness, right? But what was masterful, if masterful is the wrong word, he came up to me afterwards. He said, Stephen, he said, let's get together in New York. Now, he had never said that to me. Now, mind you, as part of the President's Commission, we traveled to Poland together. I walked through Auschwitz with Elie Wiesel and the fact-finding group. Okay, but with Elie, he said, let's get together. So I went to see him on the West Side, and he said to me, Stephen, you know, I really appreciate what you said. And I'm very, very impressed. And he said, as a matter of fact, why don't you write a letter to the editor? It's interesting. He introduced the concept because it was something that was an issue at that time. And I did. But somebody who had more, you know, juice, if you will, than me got the letter published. But that turned me on to the idea, well, this is an outlet. And that's when I first started writing my letters. But what I said to him was interesting. I said, Elie, you know, if I put as much energy into making money as I have put it into this museum, I would be a wealthy man. And he said to me, without any hesitation, he said, Stephen, not everything in life is money.
Yeah.
I never forgot that.
That's very
So
good.
that was my role, in other words, to be a reflection of the next generation, but within the context of what they were about.
It looks like we kind of run out of time, and I'm sad about that because this is a fascinating story. We'll definitely continue our discussion. But I have a final question for you for this particular episode. What call to action do you want to leave with your listeners today?
Oh boy, vigilance. Don't be a bystander. And I think you described the context of an upstander, the people that Gentiles that protected the survivors during the war. And the difference is, in terms of this community, I'm assuming that it's not all, not everybody's Jewish, but certainly everybody in society. We can't be bystanders.
No.
And unfortunately, as we know right now, there are too many signs, and we are canaries in the coal mine. And you can't ignore the blatant signs. And so the question becomes...
It's not even covert, it's overt signs.
Total.
And the hatred is overt.
Total. And every day we wake up and there's another shooting.
Another shooting.
Right. And so...
And more hatred, more protests. And sometimes violent.
Yes.
And that's a sign.
Right. Unmistakable. So what I'm saying is, but people just should not be couch potatoes in the vernacular. Right. But more importantly, don't think you can't do something. And I say that because...
That's a great point.
Really. Because we say, well, why do you write the letters? A, it makes me feel good. There's a certain amount of pride, and it's over the top in terms of the numbers. But I feel as if I'm reaching people. It's a megaphone.
It's so true. It's like elections.
Right.
Your vote counts. Even though you think, it's just one vote, I'm not going to make a difference. You do make a difference. If everybody felt that way, that they can make a difference, it does make a difference. It moves the wheel.
Flipping it back to you, turnaround's fair play. Your movie. That's the beautiful part of it. You're spreading a message. You're going to high schools. You could, as your wife said, go play golf. You say, I'm not going to play golf, right? Go to Florida. I don't want to go to Florida.
It doesn't mean anything to me.
As a Jewish wine, I want to go to Florida.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that, and you know what's funny, Bernie, is that I think, and especially in your case, in my case too, we have no choice. It's just something that's there every day.
Yes.
And I say to myself, Stephen, maybe you could let go a little bit, right? But I can't. And even if I tried, something's going to come right over the transom. Steve, what about it? But I have to thank you at that. I was looking forward to this. And just to have this opportunity and what you're doing too is extremely important.
Steve Ludsin, it was a privilege and an honor to have you here with us.
Thanks.
You are a blessing to this society. You truly are. And I hope that you continue. I know you're all wound up, and I hope it doesn't run out for a long time because you're still making an impact. You really are. You made an impact on my life just today. And just meeting you. And I hope that you continue to do these great things because you see the bigger picture. You see the greater good. And I thank you for that. And I thank all of our audience members, our listeners who joined us today on this really incredible conversation with Mr. Stephen Ludsin. Thank you so much for joining me on HMTV. I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan of Raised by Survivors here on HMTV. Until next time.